All right, hello everyone. Good morning, and thank you so much for joining me. Today I'm going to be talking about 10 easy actions for an earth-friendly yard. This presentation is supported by Tarrant Regional Water District. And so before I start the presentation, I'm going to talk a little bit about them. Okay, so Tarrant Regional Water District is our regional water supplier, and what that means is that they maintain all of the pipelines and the reservoirs that are needed to supply surface water to our local water treatment plants. And so that surface water comes over, raw water comes to our local water treatment plants, and then they treat it to drinking water standards and they provide it to our communities. The reason why Tarrant Regional Water District is supporting types of presentations like this is because conservation is an important water supply strategy for us to meet the needs of our growing population. And so our water conservation facing website is savetarrantwater.com, and you can go there to look at all of our conservation resources. One of the things you can do is sign up for free weekly watering advice. It's custom to your location. And so you will receive either an email or a text message every week on Monday, telling you how much you should water your yard based on the weather for the previous week and your location. You can also sign up for a free sprinkler check if you're a Tarrant County resident. And so what that means is the licensed irrigator will come to your house and they'll check on your sprinkler system, let you know if there's any maintenance that needs to be done, or any ways that you can reduce water waste and kind of teach you about it. We also have a calendar of events and classes just like this one that you can look at that are happening in the future. And then we've got water saving tips and videos. So there's plenty of information on there, lots of resources, and then videos of these past presentations that have been done, these past live events, and then also just some instructional videos on there. Also, TRWD also partners with other organizations to provide you some of these types of educational programming. And so those are organizations like the Tarrant County Master Gardeners and Texas AgriLife Extension Service. All right, so now that I've told you a little bit about Tarrant Regional Water District, I'm gonna go ahead and start with the presentation. So this is 10 easy actions for an earth-friendly yard. My name is Heather Bass, and I'm a conservation specialist at TRWD, and I am also an ecologist. Okay, so currently our little earth is in a bit of trouble and things aren't going so well. There's a lot of things going on. We've got a reduction overall of our pollinators, and then the bee colony collapse that is happening. And of course, we need our pollinators to pollinate our crops. We've got climate change happening, pollution of all types, air, water, soil, petroleum products, plastics in our oceans, all of that type of thing. We've got the heat island effect happening in our urban centers where we've got too much concrete and that's creating a lot of heat, and that's particularly important here in Texas where it gets pretty hot and dry during the summer. We're having less and less natural areas on our earth, and that's causing a lot of things, but one of the things that it's causing is species extinction. So we're having a lot of animals that used to be with us that no longer are. And then as urban centers, a lot of times we're putting too much pressure on our rural neighbors. And so our rural, our farms and our ranches, they support us in terms of the watersheds, in terms of growing our food, in terms of allowing us to live the urban life that we do. And so when we use a lot of resources here in our urban setting, it makes it even more difficult for our rural neighbors to support all of us. But it's not all bad news. There's really a lot that can be gained, and there's really a lot that can be done, and these systems can be healed pretty easily. And there's a lot of great things that can come with creating a more sustainable and more natural environment. And so more experiences with nature. If you're creating a more sustainable, more earth-friendly yard, you're going to have a way more interesting garden, and there's going to be a lot more animals and things visiting that garden that you're going to see. We also get to kind of talk more about conserving our natural heritage and our local ecosystems, and learning more about the prairie ecosystems that we live in here in the DFW area and things like that. Um, Of course, clean air to breathe and clean water to drink are always a great benefit of having more earth-friendly practices, and then reduce reliance on that infrastructure. Better mental health, of course, we all know that going out in nature really helps our mental health. And then you get to save the earth. It's really important to contribute to a greater cause and to make sure that we're providing a better world for those that are going to come after us than we've lived in. So what I mean by an earth-friendly landscape or an earth-friendly yard is something that is going to minimize your energy use and your water use, minimize the maintenance that you're doing, pollution that you're releasing into the environment, minimize that heat island effect, and then hopefully minimize the monetary costs and the maintenance that you're doing to that landscape as well. And then you want to maximize the function of that landscape. So you want your landscape to be functional. You want it to provide something for you. And then maximizing those natural ecosystem functions that provide for us and that provide for our life. And then, of course, maximizing the beauty and joy that we all love to go when we go into our yards or when we go into nature. So I'm going to focus a lot on a few different resources. The first resource I'm going to focus on is, of course, water. So the object of these landscaping tips will be to save water, to reduce flooding, water velocity, erosion that comes with that, to improve the water quality by filtering that water a little bit more, and then improve our carbon footprint that's associated with processing that water. So we all know that this water, like I said, is processed by our local communities into drinking water, and there is a carbon footprint associated with that, of course. And then, of course, a great bonus is saving money on our water bill. So if you're using less water, you're not going to be paying for that water. Another resource that I want to focus on here is carbon and energy. So just reducing our overall carbon footprint, reducing our carbon output. Yards can output carbon in terms of the emissions that are coming out of your lawnmower or the emissions that are coming out of your fertilizer and things like that. But then also those plants are sequestering carbon, and those plants are keeping carbon in your soils. And then also the microbes in the soil and all of that, that's how you capture carbon. And so we want to reduce all of that energy and hopefully bring your yard from a carbon source where more, and generally on a yearly basis, more carbon is released into the atmosphere, and turn into a carbon sink where your yard is actually capturing more carbon than is being released by the activities that you're doing to maintain that yard. And then, of course, I want to focus on just the general health of our ecosystem, pollution, reducing pollution, and helping out wildlife. We want to support natural processes as much as possible with our suburban or urban yards. We want to reduce it, like I said, reduce that pollution, air pollution, water pollution, soil pollution. We want to support our local wildlife, and we want to conserve our local ecosystem and our local natural heritage. And a prairie dog is a really good example of that, because that's something that we used to have here in Fort Worth in the North Texas area wild, and now we do not have them wild anymore. So there's a lot of things that can be done, of course, and so I'm going to really talk about small stuff that you can do. Small changes really can make a big difference. It's important to, just do gradual changes. You don't have to do things all at once. You don't have to all of a sudden just redo your whole yard, spend a ton of money. You don't have to do anything like that. You can really do these things one step at a time, do them gradually, and in 5 years or so, you'll be so much better off than you were maybe 5 years prior to that. Thinking about the effects of your daily decisions, and then thinking about, if just say 10% of people implemented just one of these tips on their yard, think of how much of our urban areas or suburban areas are covered in our yards, and how much of an impact that could have as a cumulative effect if a lot of people did that type of thing. And then when it comes to sustainability, and then when it comes to resource use in our yard, a lot of times it is convenience worth the resource use. A lot of times we're using resources just simply because we want to do things easier. And maybe sometimes that's not the right decision. And one of the ways you can think about that is like single-use plastic. Maybe you're drinking out of that styrofoam cup for 2 hours, and then it's going to be there in the environment for years to come. And is that really worth that input? Great, so I'm going to go ahead and just start talking about these 10 tips now for a more sustainable, more earth-friendly yard. First, I'm just going to talk about your overall sort of landscape design and just thinking about what's going on in your landscape. Do you really need all of that turf grass? in the front and in the backyard. A lot of people have 90% turf grass, both in their front yard and their backyard here in the DFW area. And a lot of times that's St. Augustine, which is the high water use turf grass. A lot of times that is weekly maintenance. People mow it once per week. High water use, watering it twice per week, sometimes even more than that, unfortunately. And there's little to no ecological benefit. Turf grass in the United States is our #1 irrigated crop, and it provides us nothing. That's in front of our farmers irrigating corn, irrigating soybeans, irrigating cotton. Those are all providing us things. The turf isn't. And so really just think about that. Are you using it? If you've got kids or you got dogs and they are using it, that's great. But maybe they're just using it in the backyard. Do they really go in the front yard and do stuff with that much? Do you really need the whole front yard to be turf grass? This isn't, an English manor or anything like that, and we don't really need that type of thing. And then, is it really providing anything for you? So what type of things do you want your landscape to provide? Maybe you want something more like a veggie garden or something like that, instead of just turf grass. A lot of times, the only time people walk in their front yard is that once a week that they're mowing it. And then sometimes they don't even mow it themselves and they never are in their front yard. So is it really worth it? And you want to just make sure that you're designing your landscape thinking about your future maintenance in mind and your future use. Like, do you really want to keep maintaining this just for whatever the sake of beauty or whatever it is? Is there maybe a better decision that you could make that would decrease your maintenance and decrease the resource use that you're using on your lawn? All right, so that brings us to tip 1, and that is just remove most of your turf. And generally what we recommend to people is you split your yard into thirds. 1/3 of it, go ahead and make it that lawn, make it that turf grass. 1/3 of it's going to be ornamental plant beds, so that's things like, bushes and flowers and stuff. And then 1/3 of it is permeable hardscape. And what permeable hardscape is that it's something that water can penetrate through and isn't just going to run off. So we're not talking about just a concrete patio. The picture that you see there is a actual permeable asphalt that you can get where water runs through it, but that can be kind of expensive and maybe require some maintenance, and you don't have to do that. You could just put in some pavers with some sand underneath, maybe put in some decomposed granite or something like that, and those are all great things. So that 1/3 that is the hardscape could be maybe a great outdoor area, outdoor living space, maybe some type of cool garden paths or something like that, a little seating area. That 1/3 that is turf grass, it's great if you go ahead and make that some type of low water use turf grass or a native grass, unless you are really under 100% full shade. That's the only time I would recommend using St. Augustine as a turf grass. And then for your plant beds, native plants are going to be your best option. That's what you want to go for. Adapted plants are fine too. Maybe you want to put some veggies in there, some herbs, some fruits, something that's going to provide a little bit of something for you. And then get some shade, put some trees in there, put some bushes and stuff. Again, with the heat island effect, right? We want to reduce that. And then if you're having those beautiful outdoor living spaces, you want to make sure that it's a great temperature that you can sit out there and enjoy yourself. Right, so when it comes to turf removal, there's a lot of different benefits. It's going to add interest and function to your yard depending on what you put there. Like I said, if you put an outdoor living space, if you put a vegetable garden, you might be using that more than you used your turf grass previously. You're going to use less water, and then you're going to have some flood mitigation. So if you have just a full turf grass yard, when it rains hard, that water just runs right off, just straight off. And so if you have some of these more interesting features, if you have some plants, some bushes, some bigger things, that's going to capture some of that water. You're going to keep it for your yard. It's not going to run off in a crazy way. And you're going to have less erosion and less flooding problems, both in your house and then, for your neighborhood or whatever. And then less maintenance. Like I said, if you're mowing that turf grass once a week, you're probably not going to be maintaining the other things as often. And then again, with the mowing, less gas-powered machine use, which means less emission, which means a lower carbon footprint. And so now I want to just describe this little table here that I've got at the bottom. And so basically you'll see with each of my tips, I've got this table here, and it's talking about water use and carbon footprint. In the green, you'll see the water use and carbon footprint associated with this landscape if this tip is implemented. And then next to that, you see the water use and carbon footprint associated with a conventional lawn. And so what I've based this on is a 1,500 square foot yard, and the conventional one is 100% St. Augustine. and in Fort Worth, Texas. And so just implementing this tip of creating those thirds and removing some of that turf is going to, you can see the savings there is going to save you a little bit over 13,000 gallons of water per year. And then you've got almost 7,000 grams of carbon that are then not being released per year. And so the way this little chart here is going to work is that the tips are going to be cumulative. So every tip, you'll see how that tip is going to cumulatively affect your water use and your carbon footprint. And so at the end, you can see based on if you implemented all 10 of these tips, how much you'd be saving compared to a conventional landscape. All right, tip 2 is to just plant native plants. So now you've got your turf removed, you've got your ornamental beds on a third of your property. And so now you want to fill those ornamental beds with native plants. And what I mean by native plants is those are plants that have grown naturally in this area. They're completely fine with the weather that we have. They're completely fine with the pollinators that we have. And they've grown up with them over the years, and they have learned to live with them and learned to live with our environment. And so they really don't need any type of supplemental irrigation. They really don't need any type of help. They're very disease resistant and all of that. There are drought tolerant plants and adapted plants that you can get, at stores, and those a lot of times are fine too. You just want to make sure that they're not so adapted that they're invasive. And you can check that out just by checking out the Texas Parks and Wildlife website, and they'll let you know if a plant is invasive in the state of Texas or not. It's also important to just grow a variety of different types of plants and not just flowers, right? We've got bushes, we've got vines, we've got trees. And then I want to really talk about the tall clumping grasses. So our native ecosystem is a tall grass prairie ecosystem, and it is full of grass, but that grass isn't like the turf grass that you think of that forms a mat. They are clumping grasses that are tall. And so what that does is that creates some diversity within the landscape, and it makes it to where it kind of creates, channels and things like that within. And so you've got where, again, the water is slowed down, and you've got a lot more infiltration, and you've got a lot more diversity and habitat for animals and things like that. And it's a lot easier to grow other plants around it. And so diversity is very important whenever you're growing plants. And this chart here shows some root depth. And so that's a big thing with our native plants. One of the ways that they survive our drought is that they've got really deep roots that stretch way down in there. And so if you have a turf grass, it's maybe got roots, 3 to 6 inches under the ground. They're not really penetrating that much. But if you've got some of these grasses, they're penetrating all the way down. And so that really has a lot of great effects for us. Here's another great picture of 2 kids sitting next to a grass, so you can just see how deep those roots grow. And then some of the benefits of those deep roots. You've got thicker above ground vegetation and thicker below ground vegetation. What that means is you're sequestering more carbon, so you're keeping more carbon within that vegetation. You're also cleaning more water, and the water is infiltrating more. Those roots are allowing the water to infiltrate down into the soil, and you're keeping more of your water so that it's not just running off, and you're keeping it within your clay soils. Those, like I said, they're also slowing water down. These roots are also helping the water infiltrate, which is removing toxins out of that rainwater runoff. So the vegetation, both above and below ground, is helping capture some of that pollution that is coming out in the rain and making that water a little bit better when it does run off. These native plants also, of course, just completely require less care, require less water. A lot of times you don't really need to water them at all unless you particularly want to once they're established. And then, of course, they just provide ecosystem services for us and for all of our wildlife friends that are in this area. And so you can see here on our chart, so now that we've got 2 tips, we're saving even more water and sequestering even more carbon. So now we're up to over 15,000 gallons that are being saved of water per year, and then over 8,000 grams of carbon that aren't being put into our atmosphere. All right, tip number 3. Okay, so you've got your native plant beds, right? Now you want to go ahead and make sure that you're doing the other stuff that it takes to provide for wildlife. So what I mean by wildlife, anything from your pollinators, your butterflies and your birds and things like that, to some of the more interesting wildlife that might come around. Maybe some of us have some possums or raccoons, armadillos, lizards, things like that, all kinds of cool stuff that we can have in our yards. And And so it's really important to provide for the wildlife. If you've already got your native plants growing, you're already halfway there. And then really what you need to do is just add a few more things. So you want to provide a water source. We know that it's hot and dry here and our animals really need some water. So that could be anything like your regular little bird bath, of course, a little saucer with pebbles in it. Nothing really has to be super formal or anything like that. You can also install feeders if you like. If you want to buy, bird seed or anything like that, you can do that. You can also just plant plants that are going to provide those seeds for them. Also, installing houses for them. So bird houses, bat houses, bee houses. The one that you see here on the left-hand corner is a bee house, and that's a really super fancy formal one, and you don't have to do anything that fancy. It really is just sticks and dead grass and reeds and things like that put together, and that's what our native pollinators like to lay their eggs in and to overwinter in. And so some of the other things that you can do that are super easy, just creating a rock pile. Our little lizards and stuff, spiders, things like that, love rock piles. And I know some people think spiders are creepy, but it really is important to provide for our beneficial insects so that our pest insects don't get out of control. Because if you just try to kill every insect, those pests are resilient and they're going to come back. But we want to provide for the over 90% of insects that are actually beneficial for us, so that they can eat and kill the pest insects that we do not want. Another, really important thing is leaving dead plant matter, just waiting as long as possible to prune out that plant matter in the winter that, that has died off on your perennial plants. Like I said, there's a lot of, our native pollinators are all generally solitary dwelling. They're not like honeybees where they're going to, make a hive, sting you, things like that. They don't really do that. They're solitary. They lay their eggs in some type of dead vegetation, usually over the winter, and then hatch out. And so you want to provide some of that dead vegetation. And then, stick piles, log piles are good. And then leaving just wild areas. Like if you possibly have a little corner of your yard that you can just kind of leave wild, not really do that much to, maybe mow it like once a year or something like that. It's a really great option to just give wildlife a little refuge from the city that they live in. And so again, providing for wildlife, there's a lot of great benefits to providing for wildlife. You get a really more interesting garden, of course. You're going to see more wildlife in there. And then again, providing for those beneficial insects and providing for the beneficial wildlife is going to make sure that you keep in check some of those pests that we don't really want. And on our chart here, nothing has really changed as far as providing for wildlife. It doesn't really directly affect your water use or carbon footprint. You're just going to be having a more earth-friendly yard and indirectly maybe saving water based on those native plants and things like that. All right, the next tip. So now you've got your native plants and you're providing for your wildlife. Maybe you've got a pollinator garden going. Next tip is just let things grow. Like, does your whole garden really need to be so super perfect, manicured, stark, clean, sterile? I don't know. Is there really a reason for that? Also, if you make smart design choices and plant choices, you put the right plant where it needs to go, then you won't have to maintenance it so often, and you won't need to prune it, but maybe like once a year or something like that. In terms of just in general and living a more sustainable life and having more sustainable landscapes, it might be better to just kind of get used to things being a bit more messy and a bit more natural, because that's kind of what's gotten us into this position now. We're constantly dumping fertilizer on things. We're constantly mowing, and it really is not beneficial to our earth. And also, this is the easiest tip. You literally just do nothing. Just don't do anything. Just stop doing stuff. And the pictures here, those are some little, maybe like wildflower meadows that you could have in the corner of your garden. Sprinkle some wildflower seeds, mow it once a year, maybe in the fall or the winter, and then call it a day. There's a lot of benefits to this. Again, you're going to be having a place where wildlife can seek refuge within your yard. You're less maintenance, of course. You're not doing anything. You're not spending time on it. You're not spending the machinery used, the emissions, the carbon footprint, not spending money on gas, not spending money on electricity, not spending money on water. And then also those areas are going to, again, help that heat island effect, create less evaporation, slow that water down and all of that, so that you're going to be able to keep it And then, so this mainly really just affects our carbon footprint at this point, right? So you're reducing the maintenance, you're just letting things grow. And so that's allowing us to release less carbon into the atmosphere because a lot of those maintenance practices create emissions. Okay, so now you've got your whole awesome landscape done. You've got all of your native plants planted and you've got your wild area. And so now it's time to just stop watering so much, basically. You need to just find out how much water your landscape like really actually needs and don't just water it an indiscriminate amount that seems good. You want to make sure you're changing with the weather, of course. We've got hot times and we've got dry times that maybe we do need a little bit of supplemental irrigation. But then for the most part, our climate is pretty mild and we get a good amount of rain generally in the spring and the fall, and so you might be fine, just not watering as much. If you've got, and just kind of want an idea of things, if you've got those native and drought tolerant plants, honestly, once they're established, they don't really need any water. Maybe in the middle of the summer, if you want to give them a little supplemental irrigation, they're going to look a little bit prettier. Maybe they're going to put out a few more blooms for you. But they're likely, if they are true natives, not going to die, even if you don't give them any supplemental irrigation whatsoever. And then in terms of turf grass, in the middle of our summers, we still need less than 1 inch per week, even on St. Augustine, our most water thirsty turf grass out there. If you're not sure how much to water, you can go again and sign up for our weekly watering advice at SaveTarrantWater.com, and that'll be custom to your location and to the weather, and it'll let you know how much you should water. But in general, you really should not be watering that much, except for maybe in the summertime when it is so hot and dry. Of course, do whatever your city says in terms of your watering restrictions. You shouldn't be watering more than 2 times a week maximum. You really probably don't even need that. Don't water at any times besides after 6 p.m. and before 10 a.m. So you don't want to water during the heat of the day. And you want to make sure you're cycling and soaking, right? We've got clay soils. Our clay soils, once they absorb water, they're great at keeping that water, but it takes them a while, to absorb that water. And if all the water comes fast and hard, it's just going to run right off. And your grass is, or your clay soil or whatever you're watering is never going to even get it. In addition to that, the more infrequent and very deep watering is going to promote more robust and deep roots. If you just water very shallowly all the time, you're going to have very weak plants that are going to instantly die as soon as you don't water in that way. So again, some more ways to water less, hand water things, use like a hose sprinkler more often. Make sure you're mulching all of your beds and make sure you're putting compost in your turf grass areas. All of those things are going to make sure that we're keeping more soil or more water in our soil. And then try to reuse water anytime you can. Do you have like your dog's bowl that you're dumping out every day? Like instead of dumping it down the sink, go take it over and dump it in a plant or whatever, dump it outside. When your shower is heating up, we sometimes at TRWD, we give away these really cool devices that are called shower flowers. And it's literally just kind of like an upside down umbrella. You put it underneath your shower and it captures all the water while your shower is heating up. Maybe it takes like 3 minutes or so for your shower to heat up before you get in there. It captured it all into a bucket. You take it out of the shower and then you go water your plants with it later or whatever. If you're a type of person that has a fish tank and aquarium, that you got to do water changes quite often. So when you're doing those water changes, route that water outside. And then air conditioner condensate, especially here in Texas. We run our air conditioners a lot, and that stuff can really add up. You can get quite a few gallons from that if you capture it. And then making sure your sprinkler system is good if you do have a sprinkler system. Okay, so again, with using less water, those benefits are going to be, of course, just reducing your water use, but also decreasing that carbon footprint. Because if you're watering from your tap water, that water is drinkable water that you're putting on your lawn. And so that has been treated, of course, and has an energy cost associated with it. And then if we're using less water now, we're making sure that we have water in the future for more important uses. So the less that we water our lawns now, the more that in the future, when we have even more people and even more of these issues, that we have water that is needed for actual important things like eating and bathing and things like that. And again, it's just It's a high resource use thing to continue to use water on your lawn that is drinkable water. And so if you implement some of these things, again, your water use is going to go down. You're going to be saving quite a bit of water, and then your carbon footprint is going to go down associated with that water use as well. And so now after we've done 5 tips, so we're halfway through. If you've implemented all 5 of these tips on your lawn, you've now saved over 17,000 gallons a year and over 12,000 grams of carbon that's not being released into the atmosphere. Okay, so that brings me to tip 6, making your sprinkler system efficient. So basically, watering less is great, and it's really awesome if you don't have an irrigation system, or if you can somehow figure out how to block off and not use your irrigation system that you have. But if you do have an irrigation system and you're using that automatic irrigation system, you need to make sure that it's efficient and that you're not wasting water, because it is important. And so what that means is looking at your sprinkler system while it's running. I know a lot of people run it at whatever, 4 a.m., 5 a.m., and that's completely fine. But make sure that maybe you turn it on for that little test run or whatever on the weekends sometimes when you're out there, whatever, because you could be having a giant geyser in your yard just spraying everywhere, and you literally have no clue. You need to know how much water is being used each time. You need to know on your whole sprinkler system exactly, if you run it for 15 minutes, how many gallons is that? And then you might want to see also, how much money is that? How much money is that, looking at your water bill and how much you pay per gallon. You want to make sure that you're not just setting it and forgetting it. You want to make sure that you're changing the settings according to the weather and the season. Again, following that weekly watering advice. Also, now there's a whole lot of really cool, super high-tech controllers out there, weather-based irrigation controllers, internet-based irrigation controllers, where you don't even have to go out to your garage and push the buttons or anything. You set it right from your cell phone. A lot of them, they'll automatically hook up to an ET station, or you can put an ET station there, on your controller, and then it'll water according to the weather for you. And so technology has made that a whole lot easier. But if you don't have that type of thing, that's okay. You just need to go in there and manually adjust it. And it might take 5 minutes a week, if even that. And then there's a lot of times when you're just not going to be using it at all. And that's fine. So really in the summer is when you're going to be adjusting it. You want to make sure you're maintaining your system, just fixing any of those leaks, making sure your heads are pointed the right way. They're not spraying the street. They're not spraying the driveway, all of that kind of stuff. Don't water when it's windy, it's just blowing away. Make sure you've got your rain and freeze sensor installed. You don't want to look stupid. You don't want to have your irrigation system on out there while it's pouring down rain. And then if you're a Tarrant County resident and you want a free sprinkler evaluation, we provide those. And so a licensed irrigator will come to your house and they'll check on your sprinkler system, and they'll let you know if you need some repair or if you need to change some settings or whatever. And they're not there to sell anything. They're not there to do any repairs for you. They're there simply to inform you. Another thing that you can do, if you want to kind of take it a step further, you can convert to drip line. Spray irrigation is just not that efficient. A lot of it's blowing away. A lot of it's being evaporated. Drip lines are super efficient. Drip goes straight to the soil. The spray, a lot of times if you have, tall plants, a lot of that's getting stuck at the top and not getting so much to the soil. And so drip lines are really the way to go. You can convert your existing sprinkler system zones to drip if you like that. And it's really not that hard or anything. Now that you've maybe reduced some of your lawn, maybe you only have that 1/3 of turf, and then now you've got your 1/3 outdoor areas or whatever. Make sure you're blocking off those zones that are no longer needed if you don't need them anymore. Make sure you're turning off completely in the winter, because we really don't need that much supplemental irrigation in the winter. It's possible if it's a little bit hot and a little bit dry, we can have a hot winter sometimes, but for the most part, you could just turn it off during winter. And then for the most part, you can turn it off in the spring and the fall too, because a lot of times it rains and it's fine. All right, so looking at that smart sprinkler use, of course, you're going to reduce your water waste and your overall water use. You're going to decrease your carbon footprint associated with that. And again, you're going to make sure that in the future, water is important. Water is there for more important things. And so again, now with all these tips, we're up to saving over $20,000 gallons per year. And then the carbon footprint is continuing to go down. Okay, so now tip number 7. So now your irrigation system is efficient and you're not watering that much. but you're still getting a portion of your water right from the drinkable tap water. And so we want to try to maybe reduce that. And so the way you can do that is you can harvest rainwater. It really rains quite a bit here in terms of what we need for our landscapes. It's just that it gets really hot and dry during the summer. So if you can capture that rainfall while it's abundant, we can use it a little bit later whenever we need it. And also plants just like this water better than tap water. They don't like tap water. It doesn't taste good to them. They want that natural rainwater. That's what they love. And that can be, you can capture rainwater in a variety of ways. You could get just a little 50-gallon container like is shown here, a food safe container, and just put it under your downspout, capture it that way. You can also do something a little bit more formal. You can build one yourself and put your own little spigot on there and everything, and make sure that no mosquitoes are getting in there and all of that. You can paint them. They look really cool sometimes when they're painted, but you don't have to paint them. Obviously, check with your HOA or whatever rules there might be about it being in your front yard or whatever. And then those are just the small ones. You could get like a large cistern too. If you want something that is really going to support your entire landscape over the entire year, that's possible. And just a little example here. So a 2,000 square foot homes, 2,000 square foot roof, 35 inches of rain per year, which is pretty typical for our area. You can capture over 40,000 gallons. And if you remember from the charts that I had before, even that conventional landscape is not using 40,000 gallons of water in a year. So you could actually capture all the rain that is needed for your landscape, even if you had that conventional high water use landscape, all from harvesting rainwater. And of course, there's a little bit of inefficiency with that. And it's worth noting that you wouldn't have to have like a 40,000 gallon cistern at that point in time. Your cistern is filled up and then it's used, and it's filled up and then it's used. And so you don't have to capture that whole 40,000 gallons at once. Another way that you can capture that rainwater is having rain gardens or dry creek beds. And what that is those are just areas of depression that are either filled with just rocks or maybe filled with plants or whatever. And that's going to divert the rainwater where you want it and reduce flooding. Make sure that you're keeping some of your water. So maybe you've got a hilly lawn and all of your water just rolls right off. You can create that berm, keep that water, and then over the next 48 hours or so after it rains, that water is going to infiltrate into your landscape instead of just running straight out into the street. And again, you can have plants in there or you can not have plants in there, and you can just create kind of little rock beds. And that's a cool looking feature as well. The picture there of those rock beds, that's actually in front of our TRWD buildings there. And so there's lots of benefits to capturing rainwater. Of course, the main thing is that you're reducing that drinking water use. So you're no longer using that all important resource intensive drinking water to water your grass. And then you're decreasing energy use and carbon emissions that come with that. Also, if you're doing something like a rain garden or a bioswale or a dry creek bed, things of that nature, you're cleaning the water. You're reducing those pollutants. Even the dry creek bed, there's a biofilm of bacteria that's living on those rocks. As the water passes through, that bacteria is removing pollutants and helping us. And then, of course, you're controlling water, reducing flooding, both on a large scale in your community, but also on a small scale around your house. And so if you do have a problem-prone kind of yard where you do get some flooding in some areas, or you've got your neighbor's yard that is just draining straight into your yard or something like that, this is the type of thing that can be done that can really help that situation, and then also create a more sustainable yard. And so again, we are saving water, and the main thing about this is that we are now saving that carbon footprint that is associated with all of that water that we're using that was previously treated. And so now you can see the most exciting thing has happened now that we've gone through 7 tips. So if you've implemented all these 7 tips on your yard, and this is compared to a conventional yard, our carbon footprint is now a negative number. You can see it there, negative 990. And what that means is now that on a yearly basis, instead of our landscape emitting more carbon than it keeps, it is now keeping more carbon than it is emitting. So we are now capturing more carbon, and we're helping combat that climate change rather than contributing to it. And so that's super exciting. And then at that point in time, when your yard can convert over from a carbon source to a carbon sink. All right, your next tip. So now you've done all those things. You're now like super sustainable in terms of your resource use and everything, right? You're not using that much carbon. You're not using that much water. Now it's time to reduce your chemical use. Fertilizer, herbicides, pesticides, all these chemicals, they get in our waterways, right? They get in our soils. They cause problems. We've got pollution, we've got fish kills, we've got algae blooms, we've got it getting in areas where now we can't eat the fish, right? We can't fish there anymore. We can't swim there anymore. We don't want that. We want clean water, right? And we want to make sure that the people who need fertilizer, again, to produce maybe like crops for us to eat, are using that fertilizer, and maybe us who might not need it so much on our yard are not using it so much. In terms of the pesticides, it's bad for pollinators, of course. These pesticides are indiscriminate. They're killing all insects. And so there's this, 1% of insects maybe that you want to kill that are doing something bad, and then you're killing the 99% of other ones just, to get rid of them. And it's just not good. And then, what is the real cause of your problems? Like, a lot of these chemicals are just band-aids that are just patching up whatever problem that you might have that's underlying. And so you really want to think about that and how you can reduce your chemical use, why you're using those chemicals, and what you can do to maybe replace them or fix the problem without using chemicals to fix the problem. And so, of course, one of the main things that you can do in terms of fertilizer is just using natural or organic fertilizers and fertilizing only when needed. Take a soil test. You can't know how much nutrients you need to add to your yard if you don't know how many nutrients you have in your soil right now. And if you just listen to the fertilizer companies telling you when to fertilize, you're going to be fertilizing a lot because they're in the business to sell fertilizer. They don't care what your soil looks like right now. They're going to tell you to put the same amount on it anyways. And so that's not a safe practice, and that's not a smart practice. Again, you want to treat individual problems. A lot of times, people like to put herbicide on their yard, because of weeds or whatever. Well, you might have weeds because of an underlying problem. And the chemicals are only just going to kill the weeds right then, but then they're going to come right back, come next year or whatever, because you haven't treated that problem. There's also a lot of great natural pest solutions that you can do. If you've got bugs and stuff, there's beneficial bugs that you can release, ladybugs, praying mantises. You can just use easy soap water, manual removal, that type of thing. Think about just manually removing your weeds. Again, we're back to the difference between convenience and harming our environment. And when you've got, I can spray this chemical on it and that might have some adverse effects. Or I can just go out there and sweat for 2 hours. It's probably good for my health, and I can remove those weeds manually before they seed. That might be a better option. Again, treating the underlying issues, and then planting natives that are resilient. St. Augustine is one of the weakest plants. It is prone to pests. It's prone to disease. It loves water. Plant something that just is not so needy and so weak. These native plants have grown up with our pests, our local pests, and they know how to deal with them, and they don't need so much attention and so many chemicals. So again, with less chemicals, the benefits of that is going to be less pollution in our soils and in our waterways, less harm to wildlife that is unintended, and then less carbon footprint. Again, fertilizer factories, chemical factories, they're pumping these things out, and there's a large carbon footprint associated with that. And so just cutting out those chemicals and using more natural ways is going to, again, decrease our carbon footprint so much. And now look at that. Now we are capturing nearly 10,000 grams of carbon per year with our landscape rather than emitting that carbon. All right, tip 9, make a compost pile. So now you've reduced your fertilizer use, right? And then now you need that natural organic option. And so compost is the way to go. Make your own fertilizer, make your own organic matter that you're adding to those beds that's going to keep more water in there and everything, right? And keep processing those nutrients in the soil in a natural way and providing the nutrients that your plants need. Of course, it also reduces waste to landfill. If you're throwing away these scraps usually, now you're getting to decompose them in your own yard. And so there's a variety of different ways that you can do a compost pile. There's a variety of different containers you can put it in, but I kind of like to think of it in two different ways. There's an informal compost pile and there's a more formal compost pile. And so I actually have one of each at my house, and I use them for different purposes. For an informal compost pile, that is where I'm just dumping my kitchen scraps, indiscriminately dumping, of course, the proper organic matter, that needs to go in there. We can't put meat in there, things like that. We all know that, oils and stuff. But I'm dumping my kitchen waste, and my main objective is just to not send stuff to the landfill. And I'm not really doing a lot of maintenance on that. I'm not really caring for it that much. I'm just using it so that I'm not putting those kitchen scraps into my trash. Now, the second type is a formal compost pile. And this is the type that you're going to pay attention to what's going into that pile. So you've got the right ratios to create that beautiful, rich compost that we want to use for our yards. And so this one's more purposeful in terms of, you are reducing your waste that goes to the landfill, but then at the same time, you're actually creating a wonderful product that you can use. But along with that, it's going to come with a little bit more thought and a little bit more effort. You're going to have to turn that pile maybe a little bit more. You're going to maybe have to water it a little bit more, just monitor it, and see how it's going. And then you're going to have to look at how much of each type of thing that you're putting in there, how much brown matter, your leaves and stuff, how much kitchen waste, how much green, your yard clippings or whatever that you're putting in there. And you're going to have to monitor that and keep that at a constant ratio so that you can create that beautiful compost that you want for your yard. All right, and again with compost piles, there's really not a lot of direct benefits to your water use and your carbon footprint. It's really more indirect. So you're reducing that waste to the landfill. You're reducing your resource use, of course. If you're using it in your soil, you are decreasing your water needs. And then again, if you're using it as a fertilizer, you're decreasing your need for fertilizer, and that's going to decrease your carbon footprint indirectly. But the numbers here on our chart haven't really changed for compost because those are all going to be indirect results. All right, and then our last tip, converting from gas-powered machinery. And so this is a really easy tip, but it costs money, right? It's easy to do if you got the money and you can just go buy a new thing. But then if not, then maybe it's not so easy. I personally I think the easiest kind of thing to transition first, if you have right now all gas-powered machinery, is to go ahead and just convert your string trimmer or your weed eater or whatever. And the reason why I say that is because I've found that, first of all, they're cheap. You can go buy one for 80 or $100, and whereas the lawnmowers are going to be way more expensive than that if you get an electric lawnmower. The string trimmers are also there. I never have any problem with their power or anything. I use them in short bursts. I don't really like to use the giant weed eaters because they're just so loud and rumbly and hard to deal with. I'm a pretty small person, so I like to use the smaller electric string trimmers, and I never have a problem with it not having enough power or anything. I just have two different batteries. I use one while the other one's charging, and then I switch them out. Maybe it takes one battery to edge my front yard and then one battery to do my backyard or something like that. But I would say, kind of start with that. If you're really, want to jump into it, get an electric mower. If you're really, really cool, get a manual mower, the old school spinny types. My neighbor actually has one of those, and I love watching him go. I think it's really cool. It can be a good workout. Also, it's just not so noisy and smelly and horrible when it comes to just mowing your yard. And then thinking about raking and sweeping instead of using a leaf blower. You can get an electric leaf blower, totally, if you want to blow your leaves. But again, with the switching out convenience for your carbon footprint or whatever, maybe you can just get out there with a rake and just rake it, like you'd normally do. And then that's just as good. We don't need to use machinery maybe for every single thing. And then again, the benefits of that are going to be, of course, reducing your carbon footprint and then reducing those emissions that are coming from using that gasoline powered stuff. And so again, now we're at all 10 of our tips with our chart here. So if you've done all 10 of the tips, you're now saving tons of carbon. Your yard is now a carbon sink. You are sequestering more carbon than you are releasing into the environment. And then you are at this point only using about 12,000 gallons of water per year. instead of that original, what was that, 32,000 for that conventional landscape. And so a 20,000 gallon savings, which is a pretty big amount. All right, and so just for a quick recap, again, we've got those are the chart at the bottom is cumulative. So that means if you implemented all 10 of these tips and you previously had a conventional lawn and it was 1,500 square feet, this is approximately what you can think about in terms of savings. If you want to do your own calculations, there are plenty of calculators out there. I know the EPA has a calculator tool that you can do. There's also, if you go to BRIT.org, the Botanical Research Institute of Texas, they have a high performance landscapes calculator that I actually worked on doing some research, and that's what I used here. And you can input all of your landscaping decisions, and it'll give you your water use, your carbon footprint, and then it'll also give you an output of how you can expect to support native wildlife or support pollinators and things like that. And so how do you do all these things, right? So I've given all these tips, but a lot of the stuff you might need some more information to actually implement it in your yard. And so here are some great resources for that. Of course, SaveTarrantWater.com is our website, and it's got plenty of great resources on there. SaveTarrantWater.com/pollinator. That is the pollinator resources page that I've specifically made. It's great for building a pollinator garden. It's great if you want to know about some of your local pollinators that you're not really sure about. Maybe you saw a really cool butterfly and you want to know what plant to attract it back and make sure it comes back in your yard. There's also just a lot of great general resources about native plants and lists of native plants. Let you know how you know if a plant is native or not, lists of nurseries in the area that I know carry these native plants, lists of native plants that you know that you can get in nurseries, that type of thing. Our other regional website is waterisawesome.com, and you can go there to learn more about these smart irrigation tips and things like that. Also on SaveTarrantWater.com, we've got a lot of cool videos. We've got a DIY converting from spray to drip, that type of thing. So if you're curious about some of those irrigation things I've talked about, you can definitely visit our website. We've got a lot of information about that. Wildflower.org is a great place to start to just look at the beauty of our natural heritage, and then also look up some of those native plants, see what type of requirements they have, see what they look like, see how people are growing them, what type of pollinators they might attract, that type of thing. When it comes to just overall resources, our Texas AgriLife Extension Service is absolutely amazing. You can go there, and I mean, they've got anything. If you want to learn how to build one of those rainwater harvesting barrels that I talked about, they have an excellent section on how to build that. If you want to kind of look more into your full landscape, they've got a lot of information on just general horticultural things, growing things, pests. You know, they've got a lot of information on how to control for those pests in ways that are more natural and everything. And then also they have a lot of resources on calculating things. So if you want to know how much water you can get off your roof in a year, you can go there and they'll let you know how much water you can get off your roof in a year, that type of thing. TexasSmartScapes.com has a lot of great resources just for having a more drought tolerant, water efficient landscape, those native plants, you know, planting those native plants, some cool designs and stuff. There's a lot of, both the AgriLife and Texas Smartscape have some pre-made designs. So if you're not sure what you want to plant, you can just go there and pick one that looks good to you. And then our Environmental Protection Agency, EPA.gov, they have tons of resources, whether you just want to find out more about general sustainability and how these processes are working and how you're affecting your local environment, or if you want some more practical knowledge on how to implement some of these things, the EPA is a great place to go as well. And they'll also point you to some more localized resources as well, if that's the case. Okay, so that's the end of the presentation, and thank you so much for joining me this morning on a Saturday morning. If you have any questions, you can type them now into the live event Q&A, and I will answer them right now. I'll give you a little bit of time. If you have any type of questions, I'd be happy to answer any of them. We have an event calendar on SaveTarrantWater.com, so if you go there, you can find out about our future events that are happening. I talked a little bit about turf today, but one of the things that I have coming up now is we've got a 3-part Tough Texas Turf series coming up, and that'll be for the next 3 Wednesdays in a row. So if you're interested in that, definitely go to our website. The first one is going to be this Wednesday at the 5th, and it's going to be talking about the different types of turf that you can grow in Texas and their different requirements and everything, and how you can choose the correct turf. And then the other ones are going to talk about maintenance and things like that. And then the last one's going to talk about troubleshooting. And so those weeds and those pests and things like that. And again, how you can treat that underlying issue if you're having weed problems instead of just going out there and dumping some type of chemical on them to kill them. If you have any concerns or any larger questions, you want to just talk about water conservation, whatever, we are here at conservation@trwd.com. Go ahead and email us. We'd be happy to talk to you about anything that we do here at TRWD and about water conservation and sustainability in your landscapes. And then also go to safetarrantwater.com and sign up for our newsletter. We just released just this past month our monthly newsletter, and our new one's about to come up this Monday, and it's just once a month. Newsletter talking about water conservation information, resources for you. I've got some cool blogs that are on there talking about my landscape and some of the interesting stuff that we're doing in terms of installing pollinator gardens, installing landscapes for people, installing rainwater harvesting barrels and things of that nature. And then of course all the information about our cool events just like this that are coming up. All right, so I have a question where someone has asked, can you give us some examples of recommended native plants? And there are so many great native plants that you can plant in your yard, but I'm gonna give you just a few examples of ones that I think are absolute superstars. These are plants that you can never water them once established. Of course, you're gonna have to let them be established, but you can absolutely never water them. They will bloom constantly, from say maybe April to, all the way to the fall. I mean, there are some native plants that are just absolutely amazing. And so a few of those, let's see, I would say mealy blue sage is a big one. So it's Salvia farinaceae. Also, people call it Henry Dulberg. That's one of the colors or whatever that you can get, or one of the strains you can get of it. But that's a really big one. Our native bees absolutely love it. That our carpenter bees and our bumblebees, the big type of bees. Butterflies love it as well. Like I said, you really don't have to do anything. It'll get big, it'll spread for you, and it'll keep on blooming throughout. Greg's mistflower is kind of similar. It needs a little bit more water potentially, but Greg's mistflower or blue mistflower, both of those, they'll be blooming in the fall. And when the butterflies come back to migrate in the fall, it is absolutely amazing. You will have, hundreds of butterflies. Even if you just have, 100 square foot garden with these plants, you will have absolutely just swarms of butterflies coming in. And so that's absolutely great. Another great one is Salvia gregii. It's completely drought tolerant, little bushy type of thing, creates flowers pretty much all the time. You almost never need to do anything to it whatsoever. The Texas sage or cenizo or barometer plant, whatever you want to call that, that's a great bush. Basically, instead of blooming at a certain time of year, that one's going to bloom every time it rains. So every time you get a good rain, about three days later or something like that, you just have this giant bush just full of purple flowers, and it's absolutely beautiful. And those are one of the things that you absolutely do not have to water that whatsoever, and it'll just be absolutely beautiful. There's so many great plants. Purple coneflower is a great native. I have a lot of awesome native grasses that I absolutely love in my garden. So in terms of your native tall grass, prairie clumping style grasses, we've got little blue stem, big blue stem, bushy blue stem, Indian grass, eastern gamma grass. We've got muley. So there's Gulf muley or pink muley. There's Lindheimer's muley. So many great things that you can plant in terms of those clumping style grasses. And again, those don't need any type of supplemental irrigation. They'll just be huge and beautiful, just completely on their own. I also like some little things like wine cup, the Blackfoot daisy. I like Halilopus or sundrops. Those are all really great, kind of little low-lying, viney type of things that create, small flowers on the ground that I really like to put, in the forefront of things. Rock rose is a great little kind of bush thing. Turk's Cap is absolutely amazing. If you get Turk's Cap, it's great because you can put it in full sun or you can put it in full shade and it will still be fine, and it'll get giant, and it will, and again, need no supplemental irrigation whatsoever. And a lot of these things also, they'll spread too. So if you have an area where you don't want to buy like all the plants all at once to put in there, you can put a few in there and they'll eventually spread and get bigger and everything. And so those are just off the top of my head, some native plants that I absolutely love and that I know that I've grown in my Fort Worth yard for years that I barely do anything to. Basically, my philosophy when it comes to my native plant garden is that if it doesn't survive, then it doesn't survive. I really don't give supplemental irrigation, to be honest, at all for my native beds. I did just do some pollinator beds that I did recently. So I just planted them about maybe like 3 or 4 months ago or something like that. And I am still giving them a bit of supplemental irrigation in the summer because they can't just be, left alone. But besides that, I really don't give supplemental irrigation. Again, if you like to give supplemental irrigation to your natives, a lot of times they will just produce more flowers and be more beautiful, but they really don't need it. Someone here is asking, tell us your name again. So my name is Heather Bass, and I'm a conservation specialist with TRWD, and I'm also an ecologist that specializes in sustainable landscaping and pollinator and native plant interactions here in our North Texas native prairie ecosystems. And so you can, again, if you have any questions, any further questions, you can contact me at conservation@trwd.com. All right, and we've got someone else here who has a great suggestion. The Native Plant Society of Texas is a great resource, and that is absolutely true. The Native Plant Society, they're a nonprofit organization. They love to help you. Them and the Master Gardeners, both of them have just absolutely wonderful members that are just happy to help you. Really, like they have expertise, they have knowledge, and they want to share that. And so any of those organizations are really great for just getting people to tell you, the information that they've learned over the years and maybe their trial and error so that you don't have to do that same type of thing. But again, most of these tips can be done pretty easily and can be done in a pretty low cost way. It just matters how you want to do things. You can totally go out and buy an expensive compost bin, or you can just get some chicken wire and create like a hoop and just start putting stuff in that. It's really not that complicated, a lot of these things. And so I really think that they're accessible to most people. So again, thank you so much for joining me on this Saturday morning. And I hope you all learned something and also are inspired to go out and create more sustainable landscapes and go see the beauty of our nature and provide for our coming generation so that they can also see the beauty and so that they can have clean water and then they can have clean air. And again, if you'd like to ask any more questions, we are here for that. And thank you so much for joining us and have a great Saturday.